Okay, welcome back. This series is ended up being a little bit longer than what I had anticipated, uh, but that's okay. All right, so continuing the story of Cain and Abel. So as we were saying, this rivalry over God's approval is really what leads to the confrontation, where Cain ends up killing his brother. Did he kill him on purpose? In other words, was it cold-blooded murder? Was it premeditated? Or was it more a case of, what we might call manslaughter? Meaning, did he just get in a fight with his brother and accidentally push him too hard? He hit his head, etc. There's some debate about that. And I think it does make some difference because it casts a different light on Cain's character depending on whether it was premeditated or it was just a murder as a result of an unfortunate accident that they got in a fight, and during the scuffle he accidentally kills his brother. Now, the end result in God's eyes is really the same because Abel is dead and Cain has effectively killed his brother. And so the story ends with God coming to Cain, and just as with his parents, Adam and Eve, who had sinned and God knew it, but proceeds to question them anyway to see if they will be forthcoming and truthful. He asks of Cain, where is his brother? And this is where we get the famous quote from Cain, where he asks, am I my brother's keeper? And anyway, the end result of this is that God also casts Cain out. Cain is banished and must go forth and wander the world forever. But Cain is worried about what will come of him as a result of that, because people will be looking to kill him as a result of that. It says that God places a mark upon the forehead of Cain so that no harm can come to him. Now, this is also one of my favorite debate questions in the class when we get to this unit on Cain and Abel. Was that mark a blessing or a curse? It could be viewed either or, depending on your view, and maybe depending on whether you're a pessimist or an optimist, right? Are you one of those that sees the glass half empty or half full? How did God intend this? Knowing what we know of the Old Testament God, it might have been more apt to be punishment than blessing. Yes, Cain is protected and he has God's mark of protection. But it also means that Cain has to live forevermore with the torment of what he's done rather than the easy way out, which would be death. He's got a very, very hard row, a hard existence ahead of him. And remember, people didn't live a normal lifespan back then. So he may be cursed to some 900,000 years worth of being in torment over his brother's death. So that's maybe another angle, maybe another way to kind of think about that story. And then that brings us to the story of Noah and the flood. Now, remember, you also need to be reading these stories in your text, either during or before or after the lecture. Because the point of what I'm doing here is to enhance, hopefully, the questions that you might ask as you dive into these stories. The story of Noah and the flood, it's part of our collective memory. The idea that God gets so angry at humankind and all their sins that he decides to destroy the earth and sends this great flood, but then instructs one of his chosen ones, Noah, who is a righteous man, to build this gigantic ark and to save himself and his family and all of the animal species of the world. Therefore, when he loads the ark, he has to bring on board 2 of every kind of animal, male and female, to ensure that they will mate and keep the species going. And the idea is that Noah and his family will repopulate the earth after the destruction. Now, after the flood, and after the earth is destroyed, and it's a horrible, horrible thing, the scripture tells us, God sends the rainbow as a symbol of the covenant between himself and the new human race that will be created from the offspring of Noah. And this is a promise that God will never again destroy the earth by flood. But, it also means the new race of human beings are bound to that covenant as well. But here's what I think is interesting about the story of Noah and the flood. And again, this is one of those things that I like to bring up for class debate when we're meeting in person. But, we can think about these things online too. We're not limited in that just because we're online. So I want you to think about this quote from God, or what the scripture tells us here. And Noah built an altar to the Lord. This is after the flood, when they come out. And he took from every clean cattle and every clean fowl and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled the fragrant odor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again damn the soil on humankind's score. For the devisings of the human heart are evil from youth. And I will not again strike down all living things as I did, as long as all the days of the earth. Now, here's what I think is really cool and interesting about this passage. It's the closest we get in Scripture from the Old Testament God Jehovah to something like an apology, something like an admittance that, whoops, maybe I was too hasty. Maybe I made a mistake here. Because what Jehovah says essentially in this passage is, if I created human beings in my image and I created this flaw that makes them what they are evil from birth, that was a flaw in my design. They can't help what they are. So if God is admitting that human beings can't help what they are because it's a flaw in his design, that is an admittance of wrong on the part of God Jehovah. And so here in this scripture, he is actually apologizing and feeling bad, and thus promising that he will not commit this act again. And of course, it's still a few centuries in the future, but he's going to send his son as a way for us to have grace. Maybe this stems from that. It's a very, very interesting passage to think about in the Bible. And then I'm hoping I can wrap it up in this video here. So just a little bit on Abraham and Isaac. This is really a story that goes back to the idea of God's need for blood sacrifice for appeasement, and he's willing to sacrifice, or let me back up a little bit. Abraham, one of God's chosen ones, is tested in the Bible. He is told by an angel that he must sacrifice his son Isaac in order to appease God's lust for blood. And so the scripture tells us that Abraham proceeds to do this. He doesn't want to do it. He's a father. He's heartbroken. He's questioning, why do I have to do this? But he's willing to do it. And then at the end, just as he's about to wield the knife and sacrifice his son, the angel stops him and basically says, this was a test from God. Now God knows your loyalty. He will not question you. And the scripture tells us that Abraham goes on to be basically the leader of God's chosen race. So it's a story that really goes far towards the establishment of Judaism as a major world religion at that point. All right, so that has got us through, I think, an introduction to those stories of Genesis that you're responsible for. So the rest of the module will be, you'll be looking at Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and The Wife of Bath, and you'll have some assessments to complete. All right. So thank you for bearing with me this long. Bye-bye.